Welcome to Never Again Is Now, a podcast about anti Semitism. I am Evelyn Marcus. Jew hatred exists since the world's earliest civilizations, but the form it takes changes. It adapts to the moral fashion of the time. So today, Jews are no longer hated for rejecting Christ or for being impure as a race, but for being imperialist, colonial oppressors, for being Zionists. Naya Lecht is the co founder of a new organization, Stop Anti Zionism. She is a scholar, educator, and writer specializing in the history of anti Semitism, Jewish identity, and the suppression of Jewish identity in the Soviet Union. Naya, you've been on our show before. So great to have you back. Welcome.
Thank you so much. It's always great to be back.
Okay. And are you the founder or the co-founder of anti-Zionism? Stop
Stop it.
anti-Zionism.
I'm co-founder with another woman, also from the former Soviet Union, Natasha Pine. She's in Canada, so I'm in the United States and she's in Canada.
I
And
see.
um, from her, I learned quite a bit about the situation in Canada, which is quite much worse than it is for us here, if that is possible, but it is.
It is, huh? I've heard that from Jews who live in Canada that um, there is very aggressive anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism going on there.
Absolutely, yes. From what I understand, and I have my own podcast called Don't Know Much About, and I had the Canadian journalist Jesse Brown on, who he's the owner of Canada Land Media, and he did a series on anti-Zionism, kind of exposing what's happening in Canada. And um, from him as well as from my co-founder Natasha and from other friends who are in Canada and reading the news, what I can tell you is that in this seemingly, sweet country known as Canada, with these progressive policies and progressive ideas, you've got this really vile um, hatred roaming the streets, terrorizing Jews, and it's just getting worse and worse. I mean, we've got in Canada, from what I understand, weekly drive-by shootings of synagogues and Jewish stores, kosher restaurants. Uh, you know, the Jewish camps have been marked as Zionist camps that practice or produce genocide with little wagers. So they basically are marking and purging. They're marking Jews as Zionists in order to purge the Jews, in order to legitimize violence against Jews. And it's terrifying. It's terrifying because what's terrifying to me, Evelyn, is that um, is that Canada touts itself as this progressive place with social justice and equity and tolerance and diversity and inclusion, and all these goodies, quote unquote goodies, are producing a hotbed of this latest variant of Jew hatred, which is anti-Zionism. And I'm very careful with my words. I absolutely think it's producing. It's not that it's despite of the progressive policies. It's because of these progressive policies that anti-Zionism is allowed to fester and really find fertile ground in Canada.
Wow. It's terrible to hear. I I want to talk more about your new organization, so I leave Canada aside for a moment. Let's talk about your new organization, Stop Anti-Zionism,
Yeah.
and the upcoming World Symposium it is organizing on May 17. Can you tell us about your new organization, please?
Absolutely. Well, I want to just say that for many years, I've been very reluctant in starting another Jewish organization because, like many American Jews, or maybe even Jews around the world, I feel a sense of disappointment with Jewish leadership, both legacy Jewish leadership and sometimes even grassroots Jewish leadership. Often it's a really ugly scene. I mean, the nonprofit world, you're vying for donors. You're all trying to kind of you have these really great mission statements, but a lot of times it gets really ugly. And I really tried to stay away from it for so long. At the same time, though, um, I just been watching this, as I say, Jewish leadership not doing what I think needs to be done, which is very simple and basic. And that is to call out what has been terrorizing us, Jews and the West, for the last a minimum 20 years, since the early 2000s. And that is anti Zionism. And I've been waiting for Jewish organizations to just do something it's this really basic ask, which is name it, expose it, run a campaign against anti Zionism. In fact, as I started to work on putting together this organization, it started first as an initiative. One of the things that became ever more clear to me is that one of the biggest problems, there are many, of course, but one of the biggest problems for why we are unable to do much is language. And you would think, why is language so critical? Well, language is very important because, as you know, somebody who's Jewish and understands that when God spoke, He created. You have the word daber, davar. They're linked together, creation and speech. I think when we speak, we create a world. And for instance, when we incorrectly name what's happening today as anti-Semitism, we are allowing the criminals, we are allowing those who have been terrorizing us to go unnamed and therefore unchecked. And they're anti-Zionists. And furthermore, I moved recently to New York, right in the most perfect time, quote unquote, when Mamdani gets elected. And the best question, if you're Mamdani, that you could ever get is, Mr. Mamdani or Mayor Mamdani, what do you want to do? What do you think about anti-Semitism? He loves that question because it gives him the opportunity to denounce anti-Semitism while being an anti-Zionist. The real question should be, what are you doing about anti-Zionism? All our Jewish organizations need to move from the language of anti-Semitism to adopting this new framework and new language of anti-Zionism, because I use the following analogy. It's as if there's a crime that's committed. You call 911 and the police say, okay, what's the crime? Where is it happening? Tell me the details. And you go, there's a crime happening. And you go, and the police say, yeah, but what's the crime? And you keep on saying, well, it's a crime. No, the crime has a name. It's anti-Zionism. And the more that we are not naming it, the more it's it's taking over the streets. So when I got together with my co-founder, we both understood that we are in what she says stage 4 cancer in West. In Canada, she believes that it is at a very critical point. And she and I both said, okay, what is the first thing that we want to do when we start this organization? And that's why I initially called it an initiative, is that the very first thing we did is we wrote a declaration. We wrote a declaration in which we defined anti-Zionism. Now you would think, why? Well, a reporter recently reached out to me and asked me, is there a standardized definition for anti-Zionism? And there isn't. You go to different Jewish organizations on their website. You go to the ADL, they'll give you one definition. You go to the AJC, it'll give you another definition. You go to Stand With Us, it'll give you a different, there isn't a consensus within the Jewish world about what anti-Zionism is. And that is a problem. So I thought, okay, we need to achieve, of course, we cannot all speak in one voice, but we need to get to some sort of consensus, because the anti-Zionists are basically relying on our inability to address and confront and name it, and getting away with it. So that's the first thing we did. We penned a declaration. It took us several months. We worked actually with Natan Sharansky, who recently endorsed it and sent a video. So we're going to share that video soon with Natan Sharansky endorsing our declaration. He gave us great feedback. We worked with him. We worked with other leaders. Yes. And I just want to say one more thing about why we put together this declaration. A few months ago, Stand With Us lost a really kind of big landmark case against MIT. They were representing some students who were facing harassment and discrimination on campus because they're Jewish. And the First Circuit documents were released, and the judge wrote on page 31, he listed reasons why he rejected this case. Why does it not constitute anti-Semitism? And he said, because look, there's no consensus within the Jewish world that anti-Zionism is a form of Jew hatred. Well, he didn't say it that way. He said there's no consensus that Zionism is anti-Semitism. And everybody got angry. But the truth of the matter is he's kind of right. There isn't a consensus. So we thought to ourselves, Natasha and I, we said, you know what? What if we can put together a declaration and get these Jewish organizations to sign? So thus far, we have over about 3,000 individual signatures and about 40 organizations that have signed on to endorse this declaration and to kind of bridge to our symposium. The declaration is the anchor of the symposium. We begin the symposium with the first panel called "What is Anti-Zionism?" with an introduction to this declaration. It's a page long, the declaration. It's available on our website, www.stopaz.org. And so that is, and we could talk a little bit later about the symposium and what we're trying to achieve there. But what, she and I, when we sat down and decided to do this, it's a really simple ask in many ways, but it's also a very difficult one. We find that in the Jewish community, people are stuck to their old ways. They're stuck to the ways that they know. They don't want to do something different. Some people say, well, what's the difference? Anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism, it's all Jew hatred. But that's not necessarily correct, because you wouldn't go to a doctor who, let's say you have a particular disease. You wouldn't just go to internal medicine doctor. You would find that particular doctor who specializes in that particular disease. Anti-Zionism is the latest strain of this virus, of the age-old virus. You want to have the most particular campaign, the particular language to deliver the inoculation that you need against this particular virus. So that is what we're aiming to do here.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense. And so how do you define anti-Zionism?
Yeah, anti-Zionism is the demonization of Israel. It marks Jews in the diaspora as violators of today's morality. When you introduced today's episode, you yourself very nicely said that this is an old age hatred that mutates and changes, and it redresses itself, rehabilitates old accusations and dresses it in new moral fabric, new moral clothing. So anti-Zionism is a rehabilitation of an old hatred dressed in modern fancy language of human rights to demonize Israel and mark Jews in the diaspora as evil demons. Now, let me just say one thing. In today's day and age, in Manhattan, in Los Angeles, in Chicago, in Berlin, you walk out in the streets, you ask people, do you believe in demons? Most people will say no, but do you believe in evil? What is evil? Well, genocide is evil, apartheid is evil, Nazis are evil, white supremacy is evil. That is the demonization of Israel. They take what is the violation of today's morality. Human rights is today's morality. What violates human rights? Genocide, colonialism, apartheid, racism, Nazism. And that is how Israel's labeled. And that the reason it's part of this history, the long history of Jew hatred, is that's how Jew hatred manifests. It's a demonization of the Jew by taking whatever society at that time deemed to be moral and saying the Jew violates that morality.
Now, what I could say against that
Yeah.
is um, that if a Jew distances him or herself from Israel,
Yeah.
then there would be no problem for the anti-Zionist. Correct?
Uh, no, that's not true. First of all, that paradigm is abusive. I call that an abusive paradigm, because it's asking yourself to kind of cut off a limb in order to participate. Cutting off Israel for a Jew is like cutting off a limb of a body part and saying you can participate in my society, but you know what? You can't have your right hand. And I'm not, it was an accident that I used my right hand, but if I forget the O Jerusalem, let my right hand not remember, right? That is the point. The point is that to ask a Jew to distance themselves from Israel is akin to asking a Jew to deny the significance of the Torah, to deny the significance of the Ten Commandments, to deny the history of the Jewish people. It is abusive. You would never ask for any other group to say, if you want to participate in my society, you have to denounce this part of who you are. It's just unacceptable.
Okay. That sounds fair to me. That we shouldn't, as a society, shouldn't ask that of Jewish people to cut off one limb. How important is um, the tie to Israel, as to Israel's existence, at least, even if you're critical, you may be critical of Israel's policies, or you may not be critical of Israel's policies, but Israel's existence, how important is that to how many Jews?
Well, let's unpack the word existence. When you say existence as a Jewish country, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I think there's enough data to support data by Pew Research done after October 7th, before October 7th. It's between 7 out of 10 to 9 out of 10 Jews in America say that Israel is central to who they are as Jews. I mean, that's undeniable. Listen, I don't know if that's where you're going with the question, but when I go on interviews quite often, the question that people often ask me is, what do we do about Jewish anti-Zionists? What do we do about Jews who participate in denouncing Israel, who are also demonizing Israel? And for many years, it, that question bothered me because it felt like, oh, I'm getting stumped. But I realized, first of all, becoming more learned in Jewish history, that Jews have always participated in anti-Jewish movements. It's not a new phenomenon. But second of all, when I'm faced with a Jew who says, well, Israel is not central to me, it doesn't really matter, because most Jews in the United States of America don't celebrate Shabbat. Most American Jewish men don't wear kippahs, but you will never tell me that a kippah is not a Jewish symbol. So it doesn't matter to me that there are vocal Jews who say Israel is X, Y, and Z, and demonize Israel. And Israel is not important to me as a Jew. That's fine. But that doesn't negate that Israel is important to Judaism. You understand? Just like wearing a kippah, most American male Jews do not wear it, but that doesn't negate that the kippah is part of Jewish custom.
Yet there are ultra Orthodox Jews, some
Yes.
sects there, who are against the existence of the state of Israel. Yet,
They're not. I have a different take on them. I
okay.
think they're this is going to sound weird, but I actually think they're Zionists. Their issue is not, they're not against Israel. They're against how we get to Israel. If these Orthodox Jews, if Messiah would come yesterday, they would be the first on the wings of the eagles to Jerusalem. That's the issue.
Mhm.
They also face Jerusalem when they pray. Their issue is they believe that how the Jewish people got to Israel today is blasphemous. That's very different from they don't think that Israel is central to Jewish identity.
Mhm. Mhm. Okay, that makes sense too to me. Tell me about the Stop Anti-Zionism symposium on May 17. It's in Toronto.
Yeah. So it's in
So,
Toronto. Our
well,
keynote
what's going to
speaker,
happen there?
what's going to happen there? Well, our keynote speaker is Ben Shapiro. And it was not an accident that we chose him for his courage, moral clarity, and convictions. He was, immediately when Natasha and I sat down and thought about a symposium, she said, we have to have Ben Shapiro. And I said, yes, absolutely. So this is our keynote speaker. He will address the audience at the very, very end. But the symposium is a key event, I believe, in the history of the Jewish people. We have, as I said, been under attack by anti-Zionism for at least 25 years, if not more, but let's say 25 years. I dated since the early 2000s. We have been very, very late to this. Or every other event has been about a conference combating anti Semitism. This is the first ever symposium to name the scourge of our time, which is anti Zionism. Now, the day, it's one day, it's extremely packed. There are over 18 speakers. We have 6 panels. The first panel is called What is Anti-Zionism? I will be appearing on that panel together with Ben Cohen from the FDD, and Einat Wilf will be joining us from Israel. The second panel is on Islamic anti-Zionism, and we're going to hear from both Arab and Jews who lived in Arab lands' voices. In their lived experience, what was it like to live in countries where anti-Zionism was institutionalized, such as in Lebanon and Syria? So we'll hear from Rowan Osman. We're also going to hear from Louis Al-Sharif about the normalization with Israel and the rejection of anti-Zionism by new countries that came into the Abraham Accords. We're going to have a panel on a legal panel. And this one is a really important one because in my conversations with different students who are part of lawsuits and the kind of the mood that many American Jews feel is that the lawsuits aren't really helping. What's going on? Why aren't we winning in the courts? What's happening? I think it's a question of culture and legislation and law. And sometimes, oftentimes, culture has to come first and law follows. So in many ways, we're going to have to be a little bit more patient because there's, talking to different legal scholars, you cannot outlaw anti-Zionism. United States of America, we have freedom of speech laws. There's no such thing. It's not illegal to participate in a hate movement. It's anti-Zionism cannot be made illegal. It's totally legal. But we have to reach to a point where in polite society, just as you don't say the N-word, we have to reach a point where in polite society, you cannot call a Jew a colonizer, a baby killer, and a white supremacist. We need to get there with the culture. So the legal panel is going to kind of put their brains together and think about how can law be a little bit more nimble, flexible to meet the moment, because we are not meeting the moment with the law, because many times the judges don't understand. They don't understand when we say calling Israel genocidal, calling Israel an apartheid state. They don't understand why that is anti-Semitism. And in many ways, it's not classical anti-Semitism, right? Anti-Semitism is the idea that Jews are racially inferior, that Jews are traitorous, that Jews cannot be trusted, or there's the earlier a religious form of Jew hatred known as anti-Judaism, that Jews killed Christ. That's the deicide charge. They don't understand why calling Israel a genocidal regime or an apartheid regime or a colonial or a Nazi state constitutes a form of Jew hatred, because our understanding of Jew hatred has been really keeping us back. We haven't really entered into the anti-Zionist era. We are in it right now with new libels. There are new libels that are being used against Jews. They're not the same libels as were used in the era of anti-Semitism or anti-Judaism. We're in the era of anti-Zionism. So that legal panel is going to address how the law can meet these moments in more kind of creative ways. We're also going to have a panel on alternative media. So social media as a form of alternative media, what's happening on social media, how can we combat anti-Zionism? And we are going to have a final panel is on disinformation. And that one will be with James Lindsay and Pamela Peresky. And we are going to also have a presenter from NCRI. I don't know if you know the organization, NCRI. They just published a really, really important study on anti-Zionism and moral inversion. And what the study found, Evelyn, which we already know, which is that people who are anti-Zionists will support totalitarian regimes. People who are anti-Zionists are warriors for social justice, but they end up actually on the side of Iran. And you go, how? Or they end up on the side of Hamas. And you go, how is that possible? Because of a moral inversion. They have a morally inverted view of the world where the oppressor and oppressed is guiding how they understand the world, which you understand already. But what if you recall just a few months ago, before the war in Iran, about 30,000, if not more, Iranian civilians were slaughtered on the streets of in Iran, in Tehran. And we all looked around and we thought, well, where's everyone? Where's everyone? Where are the social justice warriors? Where are the
Yeah.
feminists out there? Where are the women's rights leaders? Where's Angela Davis? I don't hear. Where's Judith Butler? Hello, where are you? Right, because they suffer, according to the study, but we already know this, is that they have a corrupt moral view of the world. So, and that is our day. Our day is, beginning with what is anti-Zionism. There's going to be somebody who's going to talk about the United Nations and how the United Nations has been captured by anti-Zionists since the 1960s and 70s. And so we really, our aim for this symposium is kind of to say, Hineni, like we're here, Hinenu, we are here. We are calling it what it is. We are calling the disease the correct name. It's called anti-Zionism. And please, Jewish community and our allies, let's have a paradigm shift. Move with us. Start naming this problem this correct name. Here are some tools. Learn about it. And so that is really the goal with this symposium.
Well, this sounds amazing, this symposium that
Yeah.
you're organizing here on May 17 in Toronto. Um,
I should also say that we are doing it in partnership with another amazing Jewish organization in Canada called Tafsik. So they're really instrumental. They're very bold and courageous, and they've been doing a lot of important work in Canada, a lot.
Fantastic.
So
Is there a way our listeners could attend online?
yes, so you could buy virtual tickets to watch the live stream for $36. And you just go to our website again, www.stopaz.org, and click on World Symposium. And there are tickets both for in person and virtual tickets.
Great. Stopaz.org.
Yep. Yep.
Okay. Um, so you as one of the founders of Stop Anti-Zionism and the executive director and also co-founder Natasha Payne both were born in the former Soviet Union.
Yeah.
What is the relation between the former Soviet Union and anti-Zionism?
I mean, anti-Zionism, I always say in a kind of jarring way, but it was cooked in the Soviet kitchen. It is a Soviet project. Anti-Zionism as a campaign, as a full-on demonization project whose goal was from the get-go to demonize Israel using the language of human rights, was created in the Soviet Union. It's an interesting story because in 1947, the Soviet Union voted in favor of Israel. And so what's going on there? Why would the Soviet Union support the state of Israel and its reestablishment in 1947 and then turn so vehemently against it?
Yeah.
And yeah, so the answer, as far as in my own scholarship and reading, is as follows. The Soviet Union was emerging after World War II as a superpower alongside the United States of America. And they were looking to export communism into the world. If you look at one of the major slogans in Soviet Union, it was international workers unite. It wasn't Ukrainian workers unite. It wasn't Russian workers. The goal was that spread communism worldwide, globally. And the Middle East was emerging as a really important, vital region. And they saw and they kind of bet on the idea that Israel could be that distributor channel of communism in the Middle East. And initially, it actually was. Initially, the first people who founded or reestablished the state of Israel in the early 20th century, even before the reestablishment, they were the secular, very much socialist, labor Bund Zionists, who very much brought with them the ideas from the Soviet Union. But even more so, even in the 1940s and 1950s, in Israel, you had kibbutzim with portraits of Stalin and Lenin hanging on the walls. They were very, very kind of loyal to communism in many ways. I found recently some posters from Israel. in Hebrew, talking about how, with a raised fist, that's from Lenin, that, in Hebrew it says, we unite with the workers together with the Soviets. So it's not that the Soviets were wrong in looking at Israel and thinking, well, that's going to be a good distributor for us. The fact of the matter is that though Israel, being a Jewish country, decided to chart its own distant destiny, chart its own trajectory, fate, and decided to go with the West, with America. Israel, while it, and I can't deny it, while the early kind of halutzim, the pioneers, were more, socialist. They were not religious. They were secular. They were very much influenced by the ideas of the Soviet Union, of Marxism. Later on, there was this revival of a Jewish nationalism and kind of a pride of the story of we rebuilt our civilization from so long ago. We came back, and when the Israelis stopped being loyal, you know, um, kind of obsequious servants, if you will, to the masters, to the Soviets, and turned towards the West, Stalin and subsequently Khrushchev, they vehemently turned against Israel. They felt that this was a total betrayal of the Soviet support. And the Soviets really started, if you really kind of want to date, when did they start an anti Zionist campaign? They were already starting it in the late 1940s and the 50s, but really after the Six-Day War. During the Six-Day War, they supplied the Arab countries with most of the weapons, the Soviets. And what the Soviets started to do is um, they started to influence the Arab world, but at home, back in the Soviet Union, they invested heavily in creating a full-on campaign against Israel, against Zionism, and they were very smart. I always say when I talk about the Soviet Union, they really sucked at running their own country, but they were masters at narrative manipulation, narrative propaganda, narrative formation. And what they understood, the Soviets, is after World War II, a new moral world was emerging, a world that looked at the Holocaust, looked at Second World War with the shame and guilt. And the United Nations became kind of this new church. And the United Nations came to symbolize human rights. And human rights became the morality. And so, what is Jew hatred? There are three eras of Jew hatred: anti-Judaism, anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism. And each one, the Jew is cast as a villain violating the morality of its time. The Soviets understood that human rights are the morality of that time. And so what violates this human morality? Fascism, Nazism, apartheid, genocide. And they deployed these libels, this libelous campaign against Israel. For example, the genocide libel. Many people believe that the genocide libel is an October 8th story, but no, the first recorded instance of genocide is in 1970 in the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union accused Israel of genocide. There's no war in 1970. I recently found a curious article written in 1977 in the New York Times reporting on there's something strange going on in the Soviet Union. They're saying that Israel is waging a genocide against its Arab neighbors. By the way, interestingly enough, the Soviets didn't call the Arabs Palestinians. They called them either Arabs or Arab Palestinians. Excuse me, Palestinian Arabs, excuse me. But so the Soviets really, they were clever, and I have to hand it to them. They understood that this world order, a new world order had emerged, that human rights was sanctified, and they understood that how do you demonize the Jew? And who is the Jew now? The Jew is Israel and the world stage. The Jew is, on the world stage is Israel. You label Israel as these violations of human rights. And
Yeah.
that's what they did. And so a lot of the things that, students, when I was an undergrad and even a graduate student, I would hear Zionism is racism. Zionism is racism. And I remember thinking to myself, do they understand that they are actually chanting a script that was scripted, words that were scripted for them from a totalitarian regime that no longer exists? It's remarkable. They
It
think
is.
that they organically came up with this chant, but no, it actually, we know who wrote it. By the man by last name of Primakov. He was a KGB agent, terrible guy. In 1974, he penned the Zionism is Racism. It went into the United Nations. In 1975, the United Nations passed a resolution that Zionism is racism. It didn't matter that the United Nations rescinded that resolution in 1991. It's like with all the libels, once they're deployed, it's like Pandora's box. It's so difficult um, to kind of bring it back to its normalcy. So all these people in the West chanting these things like Israel is a Nazi state. That's also from the Soviet Union. Israelis are imperialists, fascists, Nazis. Zionism is racism. All of that comes from the Soviet Union. And the Soviets just really cleverly understood marketing really, really well. And they understood that in order to demonize Israel, they had to show that Israel violates human rights.
I heard all these allegations when I was a student in university 45 years ago in Europe, in Western Europe, in Holland. Um, and
Yeah.
that was during the Cold War, where Western European opinion was highly influenced from the Soviet Union, by the Soviet Union. Um, so I already heard it then. So how did these allegations, how did this narrative survive the Soviet Union?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's absolutely important. So I recently wrote an essay in which I argue that well, let me take a few steps back and say when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, remarkably, the anti-Zionist phantom legs also collapsed, meaning that anti-Zionism was only powerful while the Soviet state was powerful in the Soviet Union. Once the Soviet Union collapsed, the anti-Zionism was no longer useful, and so they just abandoned it. Right? Ukraine emerged as a new country, Belarusia, Russia. They just that it wasn't working for them. They didn't need it. But where did it migrate? It migrated to the West. And how did it do so? Well, before the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, throughout the 1960s and 1970s and 1980s, the Soviet Union worked extremely diligently in exporting their ideas into two parts of the world: the third world, global South, and into the Arab world. For instance, they worked on the African continent. They worked with China. They worked with obviously the Arab countries, feeding them the narrative that Zionism is racism. Um, South Africa. The Soviets saw the story of apartheid in South Africa as a story of injustice, as a story of oppression. And they saw themselves as the big brothers who are going to help these South Africans. So many times, for instance, a lot of South African Black people would come into Moscow to study in the universities. And
I've
what they
seen
were
that.
studying,
I've seen that. Yeah.
right? And so they it was amazing. It was they would study and they would export these ideas back home. And so these ideas was that the world is, divided between oppressed and the oppressor. And here's a list of the oppressor. Here's a list of the oppressed. Number one oppressor is the United States of America together with Israel. These are two leading oppressors of the world. Your problems are because of America and Israel. Um, I always, when I teach my students or when I give talks, I always say, don't just look at the accusation, but look at who says the accusation. Why did they say it? How did they benefit from it? How did the Soviets benefit from telling these leaders from countries of the third world that they are being oppressed by let's say, Israel or by America? Because the Soviet Union, if you really look at the Soviet Union, they're the huge oppressors. They're huge oppressors of the 20th century. They're the empire. They're the colonizer. They, you know, Many people don't know this, but at its biggest, when the Soviet Empire had the most amount of land, they had 11 time zones. 11 time zones. All the Baltic countries, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Ukraine, Romania, Moldova, all the stand countries. they colonized all these countries. They invaded Hungary.
And
They invaded
Czechoslovakia.
and Czechoslovakia. They invaded all these countries, but accused America and accused Israel of being the aggressor. So it serves them very, very well. It served them to deflect from themselves and to project all of their own problems, all of their own actual sins onto America and Israel. It's a classic projection. But what they did is they successfully exported into two critical parts of the world, into the Arab world and into the global South. They exported this Marxist worldview where, to tell them that you are victims of America and Israel. And the other thing that is the academics of the United States of America in the
In the
19th.
Vietnam wartime,
That's
especially.
right. Right. Sometimes we think like, oh, this must be very complicated. But in that essay that I wrote about, the story of how anti-Zionism comes to the West is a story of perfect timing. It comes in the 1960s during the civil rights and anti-war movement. And it looked like anti-Zionism was designed to look like anti-racism. It looked like human rights. And so it basically came in at the right time where the America was obsessed with, correcting the injustices, being against war, being against colonialism and expansionism. And they were told that anti-Zionism is something that is, if you are against imperialism, then you have to be an anti-Zionist. If you are
Yeah.
anti-racist, you must be an anti-Zionist as well.
And so we see a huge revival of that kind of Soviet cooked Marxist outlook on two categories in the world, the oppressed and the oppressors. We see a
Yes,
huge revival of that, right?
absolutely.
Today.
Yes. I mean, it started, as I say, in the 60s and 70s, and it was just growing and growing. There are certain inflection points. There are certain points, like, for instance, the year 2014 in the United States of America, if you look at college campuses, 2014 is an accelerator year. It's a year in which the anti-Zionism is accelerated to the next level. October 7th is another accelerator. It's another catalyst, which is bizarre because October 7th is the largest massacre against Jews after the Holocaust, but it
Yeah.
actually becomes one of the best catalysts for this new form of Jew hatred to find itself in. So yeah, absolutely.
Who are the leaders of anti Zionism in the West today?
The leaders of anti-Zionism are mostly highly educated people, professors in the universities, journalists. And what's scary about that is all the things that I'm mentioning, like, for instance, the university. Why is the university such a critical institution? It is knowledge production center. The university is where knowledge is being produced and knowledge is being consumed. And you've got professors who totally buy into anti-Zionism, which is a worldview, a view that marks Israel as uniquely guilty. Israel is the unique devil in the entire world. That, in other words, if we can annihilate Israel, we can, purge the Zionists from our campus, we will be in a better place. This utopian vision, this totalitarian utopian vision. Who are these anti-Zionists? As I say, I can give names like Peter Beinart is an anti-Zionist, Hassan Piker is an anti-Zionist, Angela Davis is an anti-Zionist, Judith Butler. We can go. We have tons of names. But I think that instead of names, we should look at systems and institutions, which are the drivers of this anti-Zionism. Another system and institution that's driving is DEI. DEI is one of the main delivery mechanisms of anti-Zionism.
Diversity, equity, and inclusion
Yeah, diversity,
department.
equity, inclusion, which is now, mandated in schools. There's a DEI officers, there's DEI trainings in universities, in high schools, in elementary schools, in corporate worlds. There's a DEI officer, and a few years ago, Jews started to say, well, the problem with DEI, they said, is that the Jews are not included in the DEI kind of paradigm. And the reason that the Jews were not included is Jews are privileged, considered privileged, oppressed. They're the privileged class. And that as you just said, we just talked about what did the Marxists export? They exported anti-Zionism, but anti-Zionism thrives on this Marxist ground, on this fertile, becomes fertile with this oppressor oppressed paradigm. And so DEI basically made it so that the Jew cannot be in DI. There's no room for the Jew. There's no room for the American white. There's no room. It's made to be exclusionary, not inclusionary. So that is another delivery mechanism. So perhaps instead of who, I would say what is driving anti-Zionism. I would say higher education. I would say DEI is driving it. I would say the media is driving it. And these are all really terrifying things because this is, where culture is produced. Culture is dictated by these institutions.
Um, did it grow? Did it start organically, or was it planted?
Anti-Zionism. It's a great question. I think that it's a combination, but I think, so for instance, from the Soviet perspective, they consciously planted it into these two places in the world, i.e., the Arab world and the global South, the third world. I think, as I said just earlier, I think with the United States of America, it's a story of perfect timing, where in the 1960s there was this neo-Marxism after the Frankfurt School in Germany, where they were receptive to these ideas. They were receptive to these ideas. Yeah.
And how did it jump to 2014?
2014. So the year 2001 is a critical year, and the reason 2001 is a critical year is that's the conference in Durban, South Africa. That's also the year of the Second Intifada, and that's the year of 9/11. These three world events become this catalyst for a more vehement kind of behavior of anti-Zionism in the West. 2014 is Protective Edge. It's a major conflict between Gaza and Israel. That one is huge. That seems to have been another catalyst for anti-Zionism. And of course, October 7
Yeah,
is the
yeah,
third.
yeah. So, is the main objective of the anti-Zionism um, movement or people to abolish Israel or to hurt Jews in general?
Both. Both. They're not separable. Just like we started our conversation, can a Jew divorce themselves from Israel? The interesting thing about anti-Zionism is that unlike anti-Judaism and anti-Semitism that marks the Jews, hurts Jews, anti-Zionism's first kind of victim, first target is Israel. Israel is target number one, but because Jews are associated with Israel, rightfully so, they are the victims of this anti-Zionist campaign. It's 100, Evelyn and everybody listening. The anti-Zionists' goal and mission is to eradicate, destroy, annihilate Israel so there could be no Jewish sovereign presence in that part of the world. And
Okay.
it doesn't matter, people are like, but don't they understand that if there's going to be another Arab country, it would violate human rights? It doesn't matter because as long as Israel, the great Satan, the oppressor, the West, Israel, which to them symbolizes the West, and they hate the West, as long as that gets to be eradicated, it doesn't matter that whatever is in place can be another Iran or another Pakistan or another Afghanistan with a Taliban. That's better than Israel because they hate the West and themselves so very much.
Um, how many followers are does anti-Zionism have
I
in?
mean, I don't have the numbers for you. I don't have the numbers for you, but what is frightening, Emmeline, is that when you look at data of who is so there isn't data that says are you an anti-Zionist? They say, do you support Israel? Do you support Hamas? That's usually how the surveys go. And what is really alarming and disturbing is that the younger you go, the more you side with Hamas, and the older you go. So, for instance, in the age category of 18 to like 25, you've got 67% who support Hamas.
67%
Percent.
support Hamas?
Yes.
Of which age group?
18 to 25.
Wow, that is shocking.
Yeah, that is, and it was done so very quickly, so very quickly. And then obviously, this is again, I don't have exact numbers for you, but look at the Democratic Party. There's 7 senators or congressmen. I'm not sure if I'm which one, but that that remain who are willing to give aid to Israel. Just 7. Everyone else voted against it.
Yeah. And that is because they understand that the constituency is growing um,
Right. I mean, what do humans
against
want?
Israel.
They want power. It's like, what is working for the Democrats? Is Israel working for them now? No. So they're going to abandon Israel. They're just going to abandon Israel because it's not working for them right now.
And same thing at the Republican Party.
Yes, it is so very frightening. I talked to you this summer about the woke right. I remember I talked to you about it and how fast that also accelerated, where you've got Christians now, devout Christians who are participating in this anti-Zionism, who are calling Israel the great Satan, um, controlling the world, controlling America. Um, yeah.
So if we so it's time to go to work. We passed already the moment that we should have gone to work. What is it we should do, Naya?
I mean, it's really simple. And you're going to say, well, people are always asking me, what do we do? What's the panacea? It's really simple. And the answer is that we have to wage a campaign against anti-Zionism. Now, what does that mean? Evelyn, for many, many years, you know me and I've known you. I've done a lot of work in the quote unquote pro-Israel world, which is, I hate the term. Why do I hate the term? Because for all these years, we thought that the answer is we have to be pro-Israel. We have to be Zionists. We have to know our history. We have to know we need to know how to advocate for ourselves when the ask should have been completely different. We don't need you to be a Zionist. We don't need you to love Israel. We need you to reject anti-Zionism. That should have been the ask. We shouldn't have put the spotlight on ourselves and kept on turning our pockets inside out, showing, look, we've got the receipts, we've got the proof, we're indigenous. We came here with through the San Remo resolution. We've got the Balfour Declaration. We never violated this resolution or that resolution. We didn't start any of these wars. And we read Alan Dershowitz, The Case for Israel. We thought we thought wrongly, and I did too, that the world is suffering from misinformation. They're misinformed, but it's disinformation. Disinformation is much more difficult. Disinformation does not respond to corrections. It's not, oh, excuse me, pardon. It's not that the world is doesn't understand, doesn't have their correct facts, and we have to correct them. It's disinformation. It's libels. Libels do not respond to facts. So we have to abandon this other way that we thought that we had to do, which is the pro-Israel world, that we have to talk about how little Israel is, how diverse Israel is, how how amazing Israel is, all the human rights that Israel has. We have to take the lens away from ourselves and on to them, onto the anti-Zionists. I recently wrote a piece for JNS called The 3 Failures of Inward Advocacy. We have been doing inward advocacy. We've been thinking that the world is suffering because they don't understand Israel. So let me take you to Israel. Let me show you we don't have horns. Let me take you on a trip. Let me invite you to my house. Let me tell you about Zionism and take you through a history of the Jewish people. Let's do some more Jewish Heritage Month. Do you notice that in every single example that I just gave you, none of them ever talked about them? We were always talking about ourselves.
So what should we do instead?
Talk about them. We have to run an anti-Zionist campaign. For instance, Israel Apartheid Week. We need to have an anti-Zionism awareness week, and every campus needs to have an anti-Zionism awareness week. We need to use the correct language. You are an anti-Zionist. This is an anti-Zionist libel. You draw a boundary and you say, no, I'm not allowing you to abuse me anymore. That is what needs to happen on our
We have to
campuses.
become more assertive.
Much more assertive and less about us and talk about them and when we say go on the offense, I don't mean go and demonize Arab countries, demonize anti-Zionism. Tell the story of anti-Zionism. And here's the other thing that really I want to say is that our Jewish organizations, are not running a campaign against anti Zionism. Every single time there's a terrible attack or a terrible case of anti Zionism, we get a letter. Oh, we are disappointed in the words of Governor Newsom. Do you remember a few weeks ago, Governor Newsom sat down and basically accused Israel of apartheid? Okay. Right, because it's politically expedient to do so right now in the Democratic Party. That's why he did that. He's a political creature. He wants power. Um, I looked at the Jewish organizational response, the letters. We are deeply disappointed in Governor Newsom's rhetoric. That is such weak language. We are deeply disappointed. No, the Jewish community will not stand for an American deploying the apartheid libel. Governor Newsom is toying with anti Zionism. Learn to write better letters, learn to speak in an assertive way, learn to adopt a new framework because we are in the anti Zionist era, not in the anti Semitism era.
Naya, thank you so much. This has been an amazing conversation, and we went on for longer than we usually do in this show, but it is extremely important what you're putting our attention to, and you had extremely interesting and useful things to say about it. So, thank you very, very much for this amazing interview. And I thank our listeners for paying attention to this important topic. If you want to know more about this podcast, or if you want to listen to former episodes, go to the Never Again Is Now podcast channel on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or iHeart. And for all of us, please speak up against anti Zionism whenever you come across it, and speak up to it assertively. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.